abuse, some were mental health, some were some. There was a whole group of individuals that got that had sexual molestation and stuff against them. So they basically broke the groups down so that they would have the therapists that went to that group knew exactly what they're working with, and the people assigned to that group were specifically handpicked to help do the therapeutic outcomes with that group during the week they were there. But really what it was is working for that organization allowed me to get back to the outdoors. The idea is that instead of putting a bunch of kids in a mental health hospital walked inside all the time, you have them out in the wilderness. And when I say wilderness, you're hiking for 6 days straight in the mountains.
Wow.
You're using survival skills. In order to, I'm air quoting now, graduate from the program, you have to learn how to make deadfall snares and stuff like that. And actually trap animals. They never kill animals, but learn how to trap an animal, how to make fire from bow and drill, rubbing two sticks together kind of stuff. And the idea is that they teach you these survival skills. So that way you can look back on, I have this confidence, I can do something. The idea is it's a base zero building so that when they graduate the program, they're not cured or fixed or whatever trauma it was, but they are now at a point in their life they can go back and do outpatient. The idea is that you get them from whatever hole they were in, knowing that, hey, you did this yourself. You hiked 50 miles this week through the mountains. You topped this mountain. You know how to make fire. You can sleep alone on your outdoors by yourself. Doing stuff like that I thought was so cool. But on top of that, as much as I think it helped those kids, it definitely helped me because I was going through this healing process myself that just being outdoors really helped. And it really made a case for me that wilderness therapy really does need to be looked at too. But at the time period, I had met my wife and I was starting to, and I asked her, we were starting to talk about the future and stuff like that because the relationship was going pretty good. She's a special education teacher. And I told her I don't want to go back to EMS. And it was funny because when my contract ended, I went back to EMS because that's the only thing I knew to do. Yeah. But it was fitting. She had a job at a school system that was horrible. And the administration didn't support her. The kids were horrible. There was a lot of violence and fighting in the school system. And she was offered a job in a school system 4 hours south, still in the same state. But when going down there, there was a school that's the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. And she basically says all right, I'll move down there. I'll get this job. And you have to trust me enough to go back to school and I'll support both of us, which was a huge pill to swallow because all of a sudden, I'm not trying to be the sexist. I'm not the breadwinner, but it was different for me to know I'm now relying on someone else solely for the support of myself. When all these years I've been the person I relied on myself. And it was a lot of growing up to do there, and it was good.
Wow. That's a heck of a story. I really appreciate that you talked about relying on somebody else there. And it has nothing to do with male or female. It's that we all have this independent spirit that we want to, do things for ourselves and not, be handheld. And then when you have to acknowledge that somebody's got to help you, well, that's what has to happen. And I think we go through that when clients walk into our office, and they're in the position where they've faced reality and said, I can't do this on my own. And our responsibility as clinicians is to welcome them in as warmly and compassionately and non-judgmentally as possible. The other thing I really appreciate you mentioning was that you used to be really super judgmental, and you're continuing to work on that because that's what makes a good practitioner. Somebody who's examined his or her own flaws and then fixed them, right? And continues to work on them. And there's no arrival point at self-awareness. There's no arrival point. If you get there, you're God, because you know everything and you're so self-aware that you are one with the universe. So all we can ever do is really approach it. And we're always working. We're always fixing. It was really nice to hear you be vulnerable enough to share this stuff about your bigotry and all that stuff getting called out, and then saying, I grew from that. And I think that's what we want as a profession, is as professionals, we want to espouse and continue to popularize the idea that rehabilitation is possible, redemption is possible, grace and forgiveness and overcoming and all that stuff and growth are all possible. because if we didn't believe that, we would cease to exist as practitioners. There'd be nobody who could change, So being able to tell those stories transparently and say, I used to be this and now I'm this because of the certain insights that I gained, I think is a good modeling for people who are seeking help. Mm-hmm. So, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
So, I'm not calling out any individual one person on this, but it might segue into what we kind of want to talk about. But when I originally went to go try to seek help, I was scared because as much as we're supposed to be a vulnerable, accepting population, when I say we, I'm talking about specific social workers, but it can really go to any mental health professional. But people in my class kind of found out that I was getting help for stuff, and they I knew they talked because at that point I'd kind of come out as the gun guy because we had to talk about different stuff, and I knew they talked in the sense it's I wonder what he's getting help for. I wonder what he's doing. What's wrong with him? He has guns, doesn't he? It's I did hear rumors back from friends of mine that people are hard to interact with. There's talks going on that you might not be safe to be in a classroom with.
That's so despicable. That's so despicable, and it's rooted in nothing. Nothing. There's no data. There's no science. There's no literature that suggests that. And yet these are beliefs. And so we wonder why people are scared to come in to get treatment if they think they're going to be whispered about in the hallways of the agency. I'm thinking about that form that you had to fill out, that 97 questions or whatever it was when you first went in. Show of hands, if you're driving, don't take your hands off the wheel. But, how many of you, when you go into the primary care physician's office, are honest on the form about anything? I'm a home brewer. I drink every night of the week. But the form itself sounds super judgmental because it's do you drink alcohol? If yes, how many? And it's 0 to 1. It's per week, right? It's 0 to 1, 2 to 3, 3 plus. And you're well, 3 plus, I guess. But if it goes higher than that, it sounds if they just ask you to write it in free form, you're I don't know, 12 to 15, because that's 2 a day. Am I bad for that? You're what has the CDC said lately? And so there's this inherent judgment that says, if you do this, thou art unhealthy, or if you do this and thou art unhealthy, then thou art, a danger to self and others. So you're well, I'm just not going to go there. And then it forces us to keep this stuff below the surface, and we never get it addressed. And then we live in misery, and that sucks. And I don't know what we do to cure it other than have more podcasts. But
I always wondered how many people were midway through those questionnaires and you're screw this, I'm done.
Yeah, they drop it and walk out. Yeah. Well, I'll toot my own horn here. And at Zephyr Wellness, we purposely stripped all that stuff out of the intake form, which is shame, and I'm doing the little finger swipe thing that when you point a finger at somebody and you drag your other finger down it to point and shame at somebody. I can envision some of my professors saying something how could you take those questions off your form? Our form only asks demographics. It's who are you, what's your address, what's your insurance, what are your top 3 goals, and what brings you in today. That's it. And some people don't even want to put that down because it's well, once I put it on paper, where's the paper go, and who's going to see it? And it's well, we got to start somewhere, and the purpose for that, because my big thing is intentionality. Know why you do what you do. The intent behind asking what your 3 goals are and what brings you in is it crystallizes the outcomes, the desired outcomes. It creates a commitment to care. So you can't just get squirmy and be well, I came in for something, but really it's something else. And we'll figure that out along the way. But at least we can point to the paper and say, here's what initially brought you in. And then later, what's really cool is we can refer back after weeks and say, do you still have these things, or have they been accomplished? So it actually creates goal setting 101. It creates a framework and parameters for knowing if we're improving. But I don't want to ask. We used to do this too. I just carbon copied somebody else's form. It was abuse history and sexual violence history and alcohol history and drug history and what prescription medications. Dude, why are we making people put that stuff on paper? It doesn't make any sense. If you're a good practitioner, you're going to get that through the interview anyway. That's it. They're going to tell you what's relevant. Don't make it what you think is relevant, because it may not even be relevant. People go, well, I'm 48 years old and I did get, abused when I was 6 by my uncle, but he's dead, and I resolved that, but I guess I have to put it on the paper because you asked me. It's like, no, let's not do that.
During one of my internships, I actually was like case manager interview, whatever you want to call it, and having to do those intake interviews with people, like you could just see their face just go down. Especially when I was working in the hospital system, they were there, and someone told me, like, the rumor goes around, like, in order to get out of the hospital, like when I say like the hospital, like, the intentional lockup hospitals, like, in order to get out, you got to be serious, you got to be honest with them. Be like, I really don't want to talk about this, and I really don't want to talk about this abuse and the thing, like, the best thing I was ever told to me was, be careful what you ask, because once you open that can of worms, we're not prepared to handle that can of worms right now. So
right.
Don't open something if you can't help them through it. And I think a lot of people need to, like, understand that, like, there's nothing wrong with getting demographics and finding base information. But if are you prepared really on session 1, day 1, to talk about someone who was abused all their life by their dad? Are you really prepared for that?
Well, and are you a better question is, are you prepared to shut them down and continue the interview?
Yeah,
because if you really need that those pieces of information, you can't go that direction on that day. But what if that's what your patient wants? What if they really want? They're like, today is the day. I'm striking while the iron's hot. I have to talk about the abuse I suffered in childhood. I'm not interested in talking about my daily habits of nicotine consumption. Oh, but the form says I must ask you. You lose them. You go, sorry, not today. Come back next week. They're like, no, you had your shot. And now that person's been left basically harmed. And if they're not harmed, they certainly weren't helped. And that I'm speaking to ethical principles now, and you probably know these for the listening audience. A refresher is our 5 ethical precepts of the counseling profession are justice, which is do the right thing, act on somebody's behalf, be an advocate. Fidelity, meaning be faithful, honor the contract, honor your commitments, be transparent, be honest. Autonomy, which is respecting the autonomy of the individual you're treating for them to choose for themselves what to do, and don't make what Christian Conti would call the error of omnipotence, which is thinking that you're responsible for their behaviors or their changes or their outcomes. So respect autonomy. People can still make bad decisions if they want to. You can't control them. And then non-maleficence, which is don't hurt anybody. Sometimes people read that and they say non-malfeasance. Malfeasance is something that public officials do when they abuse their office. It's not malfeasance. It's non-maleficence. Don't be maleficent. Don't hurt anybody. And then beneficence. Benefit somebody. Be helpful. Right? So if you're doing this like static, sterilized intake process, and you're asking all these questions that really will never matter in the long course of treatment, and you push somebody out of care, they may never come back, and you violated a whole bunch of those ethical precepts by doing that. So we want to be human beings, and I think what scares clinicians, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a few years since I've been in school, and I don't know what they're teaching these days, but I think we're taught to be rigid with our intakes so that we don't miss anything, and then if we don't do that, we might miss something and forget to come back later. Oh, I totally forgot to ask about your military experience. It's like, well, no, if it's important, they'll bring it up later. But in my estimation, we're scared also to leave the form behind, or the eval, or whatever it is, whatever's the pen and paper thing, because it's harder work to do a good, robust biopsychosocial interview. It's harder because we have to hold things in our heads. We have to go where the conversation goes. It can't be rigid and sterilized. And I think people are just allergic to work, man. Like these days, I don't know. I'm starting to sound like the grumpy old man. Get off my lawn. It's like, I don't know if people are just getting entitled and they're kind of, fat, dumb, and happy because they, don't have to work super hard. But it's like there's a work allergy, and that doesn't beget good outcomes for our patients.
I'm new to the profession, so I can't really, I don't want to like speak on something that like I'm not like super involved in yet, but from my experiences going in, I think it's like a little bit of everything. There is some of it is definitely, like we're taught in school that you live and die by the form. Like you go across it from A to Z, and that way you don't skip anything, and you got to make sure everything's done so that way that later on you know exactly what you're helping with. And the other stuff is like, I think people are afraid that if they don't have the form in front of them, they they're gonna miss something, or they're not gonna